Bill, welcome to the Lead, Learn, Grow podcast.
Glad to be here today, Robin.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. We talk all the time, but I've had on my mind for the last little while, like you would be a great podcast guest because you've got a very interesting journey, and I love the way you approach business. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, and I think our listeners will pick up a few tips here and there. So let's kick it off by saying this. How did you get started, Bill, in your entrepreneurial journey?
It's a good question. Well, let's see here. In the late 90s, it was for me, I was a network engineer for some of the largest businesses in Richmond, anything from Philip Morris, Capital One, Blue Cross Blue Shield. So at that time, it was all about chasing technology, chasing certifications. I was a Cisco certified network professional. So it was all about getting to the peak of my understanding from a network architecture standpoint. And I had the good fortune of working with some really good people wherever I was placed. I was actually a consultant for a company called Broughton Systems at the time, and so I had the good fortune of meeting a lot of good people. And we go to lunch and we talk about next steps in our lives, and how great it would be to start a business. And that's kind of how it started. I started surrounding myself with like-minded people that wanted to start a technology company. We really didn't know what we wanted to do as far as like an industry or service per se, but we knew everyone had an interest in starting a company that was delivering some sort of technology services. And that's kind of how it started with me.
So, one thing before we go any further, one thing I wanted to have you talk about is you've told me stories over the years about you as a teenager and a little bit about your father's story. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. My father immigrated to this country from Cuba in 1962, and so I'm a first generation American, and I have two sisters, and we had a challenging childhood. Dad coming to this country trying to find his place and occupation and career path was challenging to say the least. Mom was a nurse, and dad ran his own business. And it's interesting because I watched my dad run his business, and I swore I'd never ever own my own business because I saw the stress it put on my dad to help us make ends meet. So, um, teenage years were difficult. I've been working essentially in the family business in some capacity since I was 7 years old. So, started starting my work years very, very early to help the family get work done and make ends meet.
Yeah, and so you took a lot of that hustle and grit into your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
When you look back at the days of starting your own business, the one that you have now, what are some of the gritty things that you did to get your business up and running, to serve the clients that you had?
Hmm. Yeah, I got a lot of little stories like that. And, you know, um, I think the one thing I took from my childhood was, and from my upbringing, was a sense of um, competitiveness and not failing, or how to deal with failure in a positive way. So when I started the company with my business partner back in 1999, 2000, and by the way, it was the third attempt. Two previous attempts I had started with friends that I made at work over the years and had failed. So I'd failed not once but twice at the attempting to start my own IT company. And then ultimately, I met my business partner, Jay Strickland, at Philip Morris. We were both network engineers, and we clicked really well. And he and I were the ones that we we learned he also had failures on his side as well, interesting enough. So we'd taken those failures and learned from them. And I think that set us up really to get out the gate strong. But we started our business probably at the worst possible time, right around 2000, 2001, when the dot-com bubble had popped and Y2K was over with and all that stuff. And so, but yeah, in the early years, we were renting a small office at what used to be called the Koger Center. It was a circular building right in front of the Koger Center off of Three Chopt Road. It's now a bank. It was an old school type of architecture from the 60s. I mean, literally the building was circle and our office was pie shaped. And we had a little server rack there, and we were trying to provide um, different types of services to some small businesses in the area. And then we hit a snag where um, we weren't growing the business as quick as we needed to, and we couldn't afford the rent there anymore. And so you're asking about a gritty story. A gritty story would be that that rack ended up in my garage, um, and I was burning the candle at both ends, like Jay. We were both working full time in our regular occupations and doing the side hustle after hours. And so there were times where the load in I would get a call from my client saying that their services were down. And the first thing I would do was call home and ask my wife to go check the circuit breaker in the garage. And we put too much draw on the amperage in the garage and actually trip the breaker. So I would let my client know that I was working on the situation and have my wife make a quick adjustment in the fuse box and get things back up and going. Call my client, let them know it was all good. So that's an example. I've got many more of gritty type stories where you did what you had to do as a business owner. I think I heard Dana White recently say, it was interesting. He was talking about his career coming up and how the person he was talking to was kind of envious of the success he'd had and what he had done with UFC. And what Dana explained, which I completely connected with, is when you're starting your own business, there are no holidays, there are no birthdays, there's no time off, there's no vacation. You're either all in or you're not. And that was our mentality. That was my mentality and Jay's mentality, that we were going to be all in. And we sacrificed more than I can even say on this podcast today, um, to make it happen, to get it to a point where it was sustainable and going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks, they get on social media these days and they read about, it seems like everybody's an entrepreneur, everybody's got a side hustle, and there's a certain glamour that is attached to it. And look, being a business owner, owning a successful business is a life-changing thing. Like it's a wonderful thing. But I don't know that it's one of those things that you almost have had to have done it before you can truly appreciate how hard it can be. You shared a story with me one time, and I can't remember the time frame on this, but it was about traveling out of state. It was around
Oh
maybe
yeah.
Thanksgiving. I don't know if I'm jogging your memory, but I always thought that was a great story of doing what it takes to, number one, serve your clients. And I think that's the thing that um, that when I think about you and Jay, I always think about the idea that, you know, you put your clients first, and your clients are really important to you. And when you sign them up as a client, there's a certain, the contract goes both ways, and you guys take that very seriously, and you try your best to do what you said you were going to do. And do you remember the story I'm referring to?
Yeah, I do. It was 2004. We were at the beginning of our journey together. Jay and I were at the beginning of our journey together, starting strategic solutions. And there was a new prospect we were both working on closing, and we 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 got the deal, and they were in pain. They were at the time they were relying on an application service provider um, out of Tampa, Florida, and their server, their practice management, their EHR, which is what they run their business on, was actually on a server in Tampa, Florida. And we had a small window of time to get them back up and going in Virginia so that patients weren't impacted, workflows weren't impacted. So we did a cannonball run the day before Thanksgiving, and Jay and I shift drove all the way down to Tampa, Florida, nonstop. And we got there. It took us about 11 hours to get there, I believe. We got there and we checked into a hotel just for a few minutes, and we just got a quick nap in before it was time. We had a scheduled appointment with the incumbent application service provider to pick up the equipment. So we had an appointment. So we managed to get a 30 or 45-minute nap before heading over there. We picked up the server and all the backup tapes. We got back in the car. We drove back to Richmond again, stopping along the way. We ended up we were home on Thanksgiving with our families, but we were both exhausted, and we'd gotten back, and then we worked on getting that equipment situated in our data center, ultimately to find out that the backup tapes were no good and the data on the server was not any good. So we had to work with our client through the rest of the weekend to get some sort of system operating and functional for them before they return to the office on Monday. So that was a crazy Thanksgiving that we chuckle about today. But yeah, that is but it's something we were very proud of. And
Yeah.
we talked a lot about that in the early years. When our prospects would ask us what kind of company we were, we would talk about that. And we're the kind of company that was going to do whatever it took to make sure they were taken care of.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, there's so much in that story, I think. I want to ask you, we're going to get into talking about sales and how you've worked on and developed sort of a sales mentality and how that's changed. But before we do that, you're in an industry that, you were talking about earlier. When you guys first got started, we were just getting past Y2K when the world was going to end and none of the
Right.
computers were going to work. And then certainly, 2001 and all the different kinds of things that have happened in the environment. But in the IT world that you have lived in, there's been a lot of change as well. What are some of the big things, just in terms of serving clients? What are some of the big things that you guys have changed? What did it used to be and what is it now? Do you find yourself more, you know, I, I could be ignorant, correct me where I'm wrong, but maybe in the early days, back 20 years ago, maybe it was more about fixing things and making sure things worked. And now I get the sense that it's more about becoming strategic partners with your clients. And yeah, we still fix things, but our value has shifted into a different area. Talk a little bit about how your focus, outwardly looking toward clients has changed over the years.
Wow, that's a great question because there's a lot to unpack there. You know, when we started the company, I can tell you a great percentage of the healthcare market was still using just paper. They were paper based. They were doing everything on paper. They had these huge rooms with files, and if you're old enough, you remember someone having to go to another room and find your folder and you pull your last year's records, whether it was a physical or tests or anything like that. So they were really heavily paper based, and that was a big reason. One of the other reasons why we chose healthcare as a vertical to focus on is we felt it was really underserved. It was really behind any other industry, anything from financial, legal, accounting, they were behind. And so we began that journey with them. We began their journey with them, going from practices, medical practices that had no computers to having their very first computer in the office, if you can imagine that. Um, so over the years, it's been again, it's a sea change. It's been a sea change. It's a slow, gradual change from early 2000s to where we are today. Honestly, I'd say probably the last 5 or 6 years, it's probably accelerated. It's gone into a more accelerated pace. But prior to that, it was really a sea change. Most medical practices just they it was hard for them to see how technology could be a business enabler. For them, it was more around, um, uh, well, it was more, and at one point the government made it it created an incentive at one point for medical practices to adopt electronic healthcare record systems, and there were actually dollars associated with that, believe it or not, at one point where they could demonstrate they were leveraging electronic healthcare records to run their business and maintain their patients' databases. There were dollars there to incent them to do that. Those glory days, that gold rush is over. Um, and But prior to that, it was really, if the doctors didn't see a value in moving to an electronic based type of some form of electronic infrastructure, they really weren't doing it, or they would do it so slow it would take them a long time. Or it would take them a great deal of time before they actually had anything in their office that resembled technology. So, but once we hit the as I call it, the gold rush, where all these vendors came into the market that were selling their electronic healthcare record systems and pushing those out. Once that wave ended, um, that's kind of where I think we are, maybe 10 years, maybe not 10 years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, where another conversation started in the market, and that was around cybersecurity. So that, I believe, uh, started to help drive medical practices invest more in technology. Unfortunately, more from a risk standpoint than anything else, because I still don't believe that the market had done a good job on showing healthcare leaders why technology was more of a business enabler than just a sunk cost.
Mhm.
So cyber was the beginning of that, reducing their risk, um, antivirus, things like that. There was one point where most practices weren't even, running an AV was like a big deal, was the first step for them. Today, we've got probably close to a dozen different products that have to run on a workstation or server to secure an environment. So I'd say cybersecurity was probably the first wave, but I think um, where we are today, we're in a much more strategic mindset. The clients that we work with today recognize technology as a differentiator, a way of providing a different patient experience, a way of providing better patient outcomes, a way to drive revenue. Uh, Medical practices, they're one of the very few industries that have contracts that are, they have fixed fee for services they provide based on contracts they've negotiated with the healthcare with carriers, with the insurance providers, and so because or insurance payers, I should say. So with that, that means that think about this. Think about being in an industry where you have fixed income with variable costs. So you've got costs that are all over the place, rising, unfortunately, but the same amount of revenue is coming in all the time. And the other way to make more revenue is to see more patients. So it's not the greatest model as far as scalability goes. So we work real hard today with our client base on how to leverage technology to drive efficiency, reduce operational costs, ultimately providing better patient care and better patient experience, but also a better bottom line.
Yeah, no, that's
That answer
good.
your question? That help?
Yeah, no, it's great. And and that I think a lot of businesses get stuck. I mean, they they don't make the shift that, we get in the mindset of, people people need this thing and they need this thing to work, and we get in a vacuum. And I think the most successful companies, at least that I run across, are people that take a step back and they say, well, how does what I do fit into the bigger picture? You have a client that's trying to grow and they're trying to have multiple locations and they're trying to expand, and really thinking about how my stuff is just a part of. So for the folks that are listening, sometimes I think to take a step back, and we're going to kind of transition into some sales discussion, but I think modern day buyers, and I think Bill's answer kind of points to this, modern day buyers, in the old days, they buyers expected you to know your stuff. You needed to know everything about your product, everything about your service. You needed to be a product expert. And I think that's still true today, but I think what modern day buyers want today is they expect you to understand their business. And knowing your product is just not enough. You have to understand how your product fits in to their business, because people are carrying computers in their pocket. Like, information is at a premium, or at an all-time high in terms of ease of use. So they need to figure out, well, how do I take this information? How do I take this product? And then how do I implement that and use that to make my business grow, to make my patients happier, to increase our revenues? And so I think it's an interesting shift that you guys have made over the years. Tell me a little bit about, as we go into talking a little bit about sales. So what was the point where you realized that maybe there was a different way? Because, I know you, and people who know you will say, Bill's a pretty confident guy. Bill, I mean, you've probably been called hard-headed once or twice in your life, and probably a little stubborn, and like you take a lot of pride in being good at what you do. And sometimes people like that never open up to the idea that, hey, maybe I'm going down a different road. Maybe there's another way to do this. So talk to me a little bit about, when did you realize that maybe you needed to approach business development and sales in a little bit of a different way? And, what wasn't working? Where
Yeah.
were you, where was your head?
Yeah. There was a time. So, just a little bit of context. So, Jay and I both have been members of a peer group, specifically for managed service providers for, geez, well over a decade, probably closer to 15 years. This peer group is called Evolve. Originally, it was called HTG, Heartland Technology Group. And this was a peer group. We'd meet on a quarterly basis. We'd sit down with other MSP owners from around the country, and we act as one another's board of directors. We'd look at best practices. We'd look at financials, industry challenges, things that are coming down the pike that we needed to all be prepared for, things like that. And one of the things on the financial side is we'd have to report on our growth. And it got to a point where, and our growth had traditionally been owner-led sales. And so, and we were out there selling with a lot of passion, a lot of, determination, personality, things like that, that I didn't realize. I thought I was just a good salesperson. And the reality is I was just doing it with what we call muscle and feel, just using statements like, hey, no one's going to work harder for you than we will. And, you call me in the middle of the night, I'm going to answer the phone, and, I'm going to be there for you. I. And all of it was, again, passion and, looking people in the eye and delivering on those promises, because we did. That's how we were. That's what we're about. But what I started noticing is on our peer groups, when we meet on a quarterly basis, that it was unpredictable. The growth might be a good quarter, might not be a great quarter, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. It was just that maybe I wasn't talking to the right person yet, or my commitment to deliver wasn't good enough in that conversation, and so there was really no rhyme or reason. So I started, at that time, this is probably 2000. 2012, 2013, I guess, where we started seeing a bit of a lull on our growth. It was kind of like just like plateauing. And it was, and we started recognizing that, hey, we've kind of said and met with the people we can meet with in a territory, in this particular territory, we need to expand outside of that. And we don't have another 10 years to go build relationships with people in another area. So how do we do this? How do we grow if we can't use that? And we didn't have an answer for it. And so I started, you know, we had, I started, we had different people coming into our peer group that were talking about sales process and methodology. And they were, so what I started doing was like taking a little piece of this and a little piece of that and trying to create this Frankenstein type thing, that with YouTube videos and, you know, um, listening to different speakers and only taking surface level stuff and trying to really put together some sort of a makeshift sales methodology. And what I ended up with was even worse than I had before. And it was because it didn't, 2 + 2 didn't equal 4, because I was using all kinds of, I was combining trigonometry with algebra with basic math, and it was a mess. And so I hired a salesperson. I was like, okay, that's my answer. I'm going to hire a salesperson. So I go and hire a salesperson who knows how to sell. Great guy. Great relationship guy. But his method of selling wasn't going to work in our vertical either at the rate we needed it to work, because he was all about building relationships, and doing that takes time. And we probably went down that road for a good 4 or 5 years with not the greatest return before we realized this isn't working either. So we had that runaway way too long. And so it was about that time, which I think puts us around 2018, I think 2019, which puts us there where I finally got called to the mat at one of our peer group meetings, where it's like, hey, you need to make some changes. And our board of directors, they were intense, which is that's what we thrived on, was accountability. And so it was like, hey, you've got to make some changes. And your growth is just too up and down. It's not consistent enough. And you need to figure this out. So at that point, I came back and I kind of had to realize, kind of like hit rock bottom somewhat, and realize that I didn't know how to sell, and I didn't know how to teach someone how to sell. And I can't rely on someone to come in and sell for me. We had to put our arms around this, face it dead in the face, and deal with it. And that was when I made the decision that, to, do some research on a proven sales methodology. Um, and I did a lot of research on this, and ultimately, I ended up connecting with you on LinkedIn, and you and I had a past, and I didn't even know that you did what you did, but you and I had a past through our sons who played baseball together in high school. So, and that's kind of how it started. I reached out to you at that point. We started a conversation so I could learn more from you about what you do and what a real sales methodology was about. And that's kind of how it started. But for me to get there, I had to really look myself in the mirror and realize you need help. You've got to, hit rock bottom somewhat from a growth standpoint, and realize that I couldn't cobble this together. The answers weren't on YouTube. The answers weren't in Google. And I had to look towards a professional resource to help me with this.
Yeah, and I mean, the truth is, I think you were doing better than most. Most people that describe the situation where they were in, where, I call it the founder's dilemma. Like they're pretty good at getting clients because they've got, their owners, they've got the passion, they care. They do crazy things like drive 11 hours and shifts, and like they do all that stuff, and that stuff gets rewarded. And I think you can build a business, you know, so big, but then when you think about how are we going to get it to the next level, and I think most people, um, you were at least trying some things. You were at least learning. Yeah, and I remember when we first met, and I told you, I think you accused me of not really believing this, but it wasn't horrible. Like it was pretty good actually. Like you had a good foundation, but I think what you said is important. You had, it was Frankenstein. You had a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there was no real depth behind it. And there
Right.
was no real why are we doing it this way? And so when you don't have that, you don't have conviction. And I think, and I told you before we did the podcast, I don't want you to shill for Sandler, but I think what the work we've done together, I think what it's given you is conviction. And I think when I look at, all of the clients that I've trained over the last almost 10 years, I think that's one thing that separates you. And the reason you've had a tremendous amount of success since is because you have conviction for what you're doing. Talk to me a little bit about, because I want to get into a little bit of the mindset. You've got a background in martial arts, and you competed at a national level and were very successful. How how do those mindsets of what you learned as an athlete and what you bring into your day-to-day activities in sales and really running a company, along with Jay, what are the parallels? What did that teach you that you still call on today?
Ooh, that's a good one. Because I would tell you that that I would attribute a great deal of my success to my martial arts background. There's a lot of parallels between business development, running your company, growth, success, and things like that, and failure, handling failure, how you handle failure, parallels very closely with martial arts training. Um, I think that for me, it is patience, uh, being able to handle failure. Yes, I competed nationally. I have bunch of, as my wife would call it, a bunch of 5 foot plastic trophies upstairs in the attic that she wants me to get rid of. But um, from winning national and a few world championships, great. That's all great. But I lost a lot. I failed a lot, and um, so I failed more than I won. And I think that going into class, being consistent. I think the things are consistency. With martial arts, you have to have a strong foundation. You have to master the basics. You have to be selfless. You have to be willing to be coached and listen and be a learner. And because if you're none of those things, you're not going to have success. You're not gonna enjoy it. It's going to be something you probably quit. And so uh, I think that just my upbringing, which is, quitting is not an option, and figuring out a way to overcome, adapt is just in my blood. And so I think that the martial arts training helped me a great deal with that. And in the sales, from a sales capacity, it there's a lot of failure in sales. You're going to fail a lot in sales, but failure is great, and I most, recently I read a great book. I think I told you about it, Inner Excellence. It was made popular on the Eagles, AJ Brown, I believe, that was reading the book on the sideline. So I read a good portion of that book, and they talk about winning and losing. The only common between winning and losing is that it's feedback. So anything you do, whether you win, or you lose, so it's all feedback. It's not failure. So if I lose a deal, if I win a deal, I've won deals that I probably scratch my head and go, how did I win that? And I've lost deals where I've gone, man, I did everything right. I was nailing this and I still lost it. So at the end of the day, it's all feedback. So how you use that feedback is important. In martial arts, we use feedback a lot. If I'm sparring, or if I'm in a sparring competition, or if I'm breaking, or if I'm doing anything that demonstrating a technique and it's not done right, I might be thinking I'm doing it right. I might be thinking I'm doing the greatest job in the world. I've faced guys where I thought I was prepared and I was going to win that match and I lost. So it's all about the feedback. I think that's the parallel, is you're going to fail a lot. What you do with that feedback is up to you.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think you've been really good. You're a good example of finding the lesson in failure and figuring out, and there's a certain level of detachment and humility that's required to do that. Um, but I think if you think about, okay, if I'm in a sales encounter and I'm working a deal and I do it mostly right and feel good about it. But if at the end the feedback I get or through my debriefing I understand, oh wow, now that it's over, I can see this a little bit differently and I should have done this or that. A lot of people just let two or three of those pile up and they get very discouraged. And I tell my clients, fairly often, is like, don't waste a failure. Like, do not waste a failure, because if you can figure out that, one part of your process wasn't quite as clear as it could have been, wasn't executed as well as perhaps it should have been, if you can figure out the learning, you don't make that mistake again. And that failure will help you be successful for the rest of your life. Like so truly learning the lesson, I think is is really important. I think that's something that you've been able to do. Um, the other thing too, and I want to hear what you say about this, but so if we think about failure and folks that are listening to this that are in sales, it might be the differentiator between average and great. It's like your relationship to failure. And so, so one of the reasons we stay in our comfort zone is because if we get out of our comfort zone, we know we're introducing failure. And so if we don't have a good relationship with failure, we stay nestled up in our comfort zone. How do you think about comfort zones, and what are some examples maybe of how you have pushed yourself on the edge of your comfort zone, and how has that helped you grow?
Yeah, probably give you a little bit of context on my response, which is um, each week I chair a sales success group for our parent company, New Charter Technologies, where we're 30 MSPs. We're one of 30 MSPs across the country, and all with using similar tools and methodologies. But one of the things I do is on a weekly basis, I chair a sales success group call on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I'm on there with sales professionals that have some Sandler training. Most of them have Sandler training. Some of them don't. They're still, they're leveraging their own personal method of how they sell. But to answer your question, I think it's about when you learn a new concept, is going on and doing it. One of the things that I do when I'm in class and I hear a different concept or a different technique or method, I don't just go, "Wow, that's great. That sounds interesting." I actually go and put it into action, right? And I know I'm going to fail. It's okay. I'm going to fail. I'm going to do it crappy, and it's not going to sound great. But I know that if I go out and take this new concept and put it as part of my process, that going through trial and error, I will have success with it. And it's about taking that first step and having the comfort to do that. And I drive that. The reason I bring up my peer groups that I chair is because I share my story with them. I share my failures with them so that they are comfortable taking that first step. If they think that if I'm just this guy that just is really good at this and but if I don't share my failures with them and what I learned from those failures, they're never going to be willing to take that first step. So that to me is the key: is stepping outside your comfort zone, having the confidence in yourself, knowing that failure is okay, and if it doesn't go well, you're going to get a lot of and like I think you said a little while earlier, a little bit earlier, don't waste a good failure, right? Take advantage of what you learn because it's going to accelerate your improvement versus not doing it, and then you'll never see it. So anyway, I guess the point I'm making is I want to be an example, not for I know what I have to do for me, but I want to be an example for others. So I share my failures, and I think the first thing you when you learn a new concept like we do, the first thing I do is I'm dying to get back to the office and figure out who I'm going to use it on first, so that I can get that feedback.
Yeah,
Sound
that's really
clear? Does
good.
that kind of sound clear?
No, that's great. It's either going to be a success or a story, and we win both ways. And it just reminds me of, and it might be like the separator. I mean, it might be the thing that separates those who will versus those who won't. Because I think everybody can. I think everybody can be good at sales, but some will and some won't. And
Right.
and it might be maybe as simple as what you just talked about. Are they willing? Am I willing to try something different, to add something, to adjust something, knowing that it may not be a magic bullet, but it's that idea of imperfect action. And I think you've done a really good job with that. Talk a little bit, Bill, just a handful more questions here. I got two or three things I want to poke on a little bit, but um, we've been working together for a long time. And like, what's the value? Like, a lot of people look at any kind of training, and especially sales training. I think sometimes if you say, when I say I'm a sales trainer, they envision spending, you know, $87 and going to the local ballroom and doing in a hotel and doing a 1 day session to learn how to sell. And you and I have been working together for many years now. And so it's ongoing reinforcement. What's the value of that kind of learning and training versus just a workshop?
There's a lot of parallels to that question with the one about martial arts training. When I was training for tournaments and competitions and things like that, I was going to class 4 days a week, and I was in there for an hour and a half, and I would stay and train even afterwards because I knew that for me to be, and I would include sparring, multiple people in the room. I wanted the concept in our school was cry in the dojang, laugh on the battlefield. Okay. Versus the opposite, which is have fun in class and then go out in the street, cry because I couldn't handle a situation or defend myself or something like that. Same goes with sales. So, you know, I'm one of the things I thought that was going to work against me when I first started my sales training was that I was in there with other companies that didn't do what I did. They might provide concrete services or landscaping or sell insurance and things like that. Have nothing to do with technology, but actually it's a superpower because the situations that you get exposed to when we're going through our training in class actually bolsters me. It makes I guess I'm better rounded, much more well rounded than if I were just in there only with people selling technology. And I would say that the same approach applies in class, versus a workshop. If I just did a workshop, once a quarter, and let's say, and that's, if I just did that once a quarter, I would not develop the habits or behaviors that I need to take with me when I walk out of there to be successful. So, same with martial arts, same with my training here with you is by being in an hour and a half class each week and and really being challenged and um, bringing in what I learned on a failure from the week before and hearing what others are dealing with their failures and when they've attempted new things and their successes. Those things create a culture like no other, and that's what it comes back down to. I think I'm trying to get it to is culture. You can't get culture in a workshop. You're going to get culture. You're going to get mindset when you are consistently training to be the best that you can be, and learn from your failures and celebrate your successes and build on your successes. That's how athletes operate. That's, if you're, that's, so for me, it is that consistency of culture, the concept of, you know, being put on your red dot in your class and being put on the spot with Bill, talk about, reverse, talk about handling this type of objection, anything like that that's going to create stress for me and my classmates when we get out when we suffer like that. Suffer is probably a strong word, but when we get stressed like that in class and then we have to go out in the real world and handle it with a real prospect, man, it is so much easier, so much more relaxed. And that comes across in the exchange with your prospect, and it separates you from your competition because your competition is going to be in there talking a mile a minute, selling on speeds and feeds, and not doing what you're doing, which is having more of a conversation and making it more consultative.
Yeah, and I think, for folks that are listening to this, I've got one more question I want to ask you, and then we'll start to wrap up. But for folks that are listening to this, I know there's a lot of people in sales and sales leadership and that sort of thing. And filter what Bill is saying through this lens. Like our goal in sales, and Bill kind of alluded to this earlier, it's not to go make a sell. Nobody wants to sell something to somebody that doesn't want it, doesn't need it. Our goal is not to be pushy and aggressive. And, I tell people you can't sell anybody anything. Like if I had the power to do that, wow, that's a that's a magical power. So all I can do is kind of control my process and the way I engage with you. But it's important as you're hearing this, we're talking about different sales techniques and trainings and practice and all that. All you're trying to do in sales is just try to get to the truth. You're just trying to have an adult conversation to decide if you can help them. And if you can't, that's okay. And has that been have you always sold like that, Bill, or has that
No,
been like a mindset shift for you? Just the overall way that you approach sales.
no, it has been a huge mind shift for me because I can think back when I think back at how I used to sell. Sometimes I'll sit back and just think, and I want to crawl under my desk, just because I was doing what every other salesperson does. I'm talking a mile a minute instead of listening and understanding whether or not we're going to be a fit and whether or not they're a fit for us. And versus what I used to do, which was I wanted to qualify and I wanted to sell to everyone. And that's counterproductive. That may sound like a great idea, like the salesperson that wants to close every deal. You don't want to close every deal, and you want to close the deals that work for you and the deals that work for your prospect. And so, without having a system and a method in place, you might get lucky here and there, but the reality is you might close deals that shouldn't have closed. And you're probably going to lose a lot of deals that you could have closed because um, you weren't listening effectively enough. You weren't conversational. You weren't consultative. You were strictly just trying to get a win, trying to sell. And that has been huge for me over the years. And I'm in your mastery class. I completed foundations, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And so even in mastery, I continue to develop a depth and refine my techniques and my methods and learn. So um, and that's a big part of it is you know learning how to talk to people, understanding myself better. You have to understand yourself really well before you can really effectively communicate with anyone. And that's been a big part of my Sandler journey as well, is learning more about me.
Yeah, and I think, and I admire the way you've approached it in the sense that, most, if you look at great performers in any arena, um, they practice, they work on their craft, they take their craft seriously. I read recently where LeBron James spends hundreds of thousands of dollars on nutritionists and people to help him recover and fuel the right way. And you think about any a musician. They practice and they really take their craft seriously. And one of the things that frustrates me about the world of sales is that sales can be an arena to change your life. I mean, you look at a nice neighborhood, some nice neighborhoods, it's doctors, lawyers, and salespeople, and you really have a chance in sales to jump social classes. I mean, you can really do well if you're good at sales. Yet, I find a lot of people just don't practice their craft. They don't take it seriously. They don't have a goal of being really, really great at what I do. And I think those who do, um, it shows. It shows up.
Yep.
So let me ask you this, and it may relate to the little comment that I just had, but if if you were if you were talking to someone that's newer in sales, maybe they're just getting their career started, um, just based on your years of experience and the success that you've had, what are some of the things you would tell them to take this big, daunting world of sales and kind of simplify it? What advice would you give folks?
Someone who wants to get into sales.
Yeah, they're a young salesperson. They're just kind of getting their sea legs and they want to have a good career. What would you say?
Let's see. Um, I think it's important that they know themselves really well, that they are making the right investments in personal development for themselves. I think to be effective at sales, you have to believe in yourself. You have to have confidence in yourself. You have to recognize yourself as look yourself in the mirror and be happy with what you see and love what you see. And because you have to give yourself a lot of grace if you're going to go out and sell. And um, you're going to have, because of the number of failures, because of the anxiety, getting on a cold call, getting face to face with a stranger. If you're young and this is new for you, these are things that are going to create anxiety, make you nervous. Um, and I think the one of the ways you can get over that is look yourself in the mirror, love yourself, have confidence in who you are, and that give yourself grace. You're going to make mistakes. This is a learning process, and outside of that, I would probably, recommend that, they choose if they really want to make this, you can't learn karate from a book. Okay. So I would say that's one of my favorite analogies. You can't learn karate from a book. So you go to a school, a reputable school that's going to teach you fundamentals, foundation, and you can, a place that you want to be and grow in. I would recommend that you find a methodology or some training that is formal by an expert that is going to help you on your journey and evaluate whether they're the right fit for you if you start that process. But first you got to be good with you. Know know that what you're doing is very hard. Selling is extremely hard. It's like baseball. It's a game of failure. You're going to fail more than you're going to succeed, and being good with that. And then if you want to continue, then I would advise them to get training in a specific methodology and make sure that's the right method for them, that works for them, and stick to that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, Bill, a lot of good stuff. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences. where can people tell us a little bit about your company, where folks can find you, connect with
Sure.
you? Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, our company name, Strategic Solutions, is we're based in Innsbruck. We have locations across the state. We provide healthcare managed IT services for medical practices throughout the Mid-Atlantic. We have many clients that are national. We were acquired a little over 3 years ago by New Charter Technologies, which has been an incredible journey as our parent company. And uh, they are because of that acquisition, we have partner companies across the country that allow us to extend more value to our clients than ever before with services and solutions that we would never be able to do independent of them. Um, yeah, I mean, I think from a service standpoint, the our client base relies on us heavily to secure and support their organizations, make sure they're compliant, make sure that they're aligning, the technology is being aligned with their organizational goals. And, at the end of the day, everyone in our company walks out of here feeling good that whatever they've done, whether it's assisting a doctor with an e-prescribe module or with helping a front desk person deal with a technical issue on getting a patient scheduled and everything in between. They feel that when they walk out of here, they feel that they've contributed to someone's patient care and their patient experience through the vein of technology.
Yeah, and the thing I want to close this with is I hope as you're listening you hear this, but Bill is a master professional. Like he does, and again, sales is only a part of what he does, but he's embraced the role of business development and sales, and he's really, really good at it. And he's got a track record to prove it. But at the same time, uh, a lot of people think about good salespeople and they think of, backslapping, life of the party, you know, white shoe, bad sport coat, swarmy, pushy, aggressive. And that's not even close to what a great salesperson is. A great salesperson is a problem finder. And they help people solve problems that are keeping them awake at night. And a great salesperson also, as I said earlier, says, if I don't think I can help you, I'll let you know that. And if you don't want my help, you let me know that. A great salesperson is the antithesis of what we think about. A great salesperson is like a coach and an advisor, helping people solve problems, looking at their goals and figuring out, can I help you get closer to your goals? And I think that's where Bill has differentiated himself, is he's really good at the science of sales, but behind it all, it's all about um, serving clients and doing work that he and his team can be proud of. And that's a great combination when you can make that happen. So, Bill, anything that we didn't talk about that you want to add in? Did we miss any big topics? Anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, I don't think so. I think for me, maybe that this journey that I've been on has not only impacted me professionally, but also personally. It's helped me reconnect with myself, look at myself a little differently, um, enhance my relationships professionally and personal at home, with wife, kids, friends, etc. So this is not just about selling. To me, it's more about how I live my life. And so we touched on that, I think, in a few different areas, but for me, it's enhanced my way of living.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to end. Bill, thanks for coming on. Great job.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you.